Hi everyone, it's time for another BC Poly Hot Stove, the place where we come and talk all things BC and federal and municipal politics. I'm Jordan Bateman, I'm the Vice President Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, the mighty ICBA here in Metrotown, joined as always across the pond by...
I am Maclean K, the sounds like equally plugged up editor-in-chief of the Orca here in the lovely rock pile known as the legislature here in Victoria.
Maclean, we've been emailing this week. Is it possible the computers have now found a way to transmit cold symptoms over the emails?
Nothing would surprise me at this point. Yep. Although, as I was telling someone else in the press gallery here just a few minutes ago, because everyone has a cold, and so we're all wondering who to blame. When you have a kid in preschool,
I blame John Horgan.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
When you have a kid in preschool like I do, that the odds are always good that I'm patient zero.
Yes.
So I apologize.
Yes. Well, the worst is being the first one sick in your family, because they all treat you like a pariah, and then you're just waiting for one of them to get sick and then blame you. So that's the point I'm at now. So I'm just praying the children survive the experience here. Maclean, the legislature, seen right now as we speak of a big demonstration regarding forestry. What's going on there, and how the heck can good, loyal steelworker, NDP voting steelworkers be without a contract for 6 months? How is that even possible in this day and age?
6 months. It's almost inconceivable how long that is. I mean, you're right. There's a sizable protest, but a very sort of quiet and respectful one. They're not, chanting or it actually just kind of looks like a large lineup. But make no mistake, these people are frustrated, and they're not just the actual workers on strike. A lot of them are the contractors and that who rely on the business, and some of whom have not been, working or paid. And I mean, 6 months. I couldn't absorb 6 months with no paychecks. I don't think most Canadians could come anywhere close to that. And if you read Vaughn Palmer's column this morning, and you should, I mean, it's kind of astonishing that this premier, who is proud of the fact that he earned his hard hat, as Vaughn put it, would just sort of think that it's normal and okay, and it's tough, I guess, that they've been out of work for 6 months, but they'll get through it. Well, they won't. That's the problem.
Oh, but it's just collective bargaining. We have to let the collective bargaining process take its course. Why are NDPers just so blind when it comes to what this does to real families?
Well, yeah, it's all things being equal. Yes, the collective bargaining process is the best, but things are not equal.
No.
The Horgan is right when he says the best mediator in the province, Vince Reddy, is there, and there's still no agreement. At a certain point, someone is going to have to intervene. The communities and places like Port McNeill are withering and dying as we speak. And that's not hyperbole.
Yeah. And what I'm surprised by is, look, I think we all agree the NDP generally has an anti-employer bent in it. They don't particularly think much of any employer in the province other than themselves. But you've got the steelworkers on the other side. There is no union with more influence on this NDP government than the steelworkers. They own that party. They're throughout the ranks of the MLAs in the back room. They are everywhere. The shocking thing for me was Vaughn was on with John McComb this morning as I was driving in, and Vaughn's like, this is over 1%. The company's offered 2, the union wants 3. If the average wage is $80,000, you're talking about $800 a year. These folks have been out for 6 months.
Yeah,
it's baffling to me.
I wish I had more to add other than to echo what you just said. It's baffling. You're right, and we're talking about $800 is nothing to sneeze at, but equally, being out of work for 6 months.
Yeah.
It's a lot, is nothing to sneeze at. It's almost incomprehensible that something could drag on for this long, for 6 months. And it's only been, the really damning thing, I think, from the provincial government's point of view, is that it only really seems to have gotten their attention now.
Yeah.
It took a now infamous video with Claire Trevena, where it's just sort of, this thing has just kind of been malingering off in the distance and behind the scenes, and nobody paid it much mind. And it just doesn't speak well of anyone.
No, exactly. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I thought the folks on that Trevena video had some very valid suggestions, ideas. They were looking for help. And the human cost of this is something they never talk about. But you're talking about communities where this is the main or only industry. Spin-off jobs have been lost. Marriages have broken up. This sounds like it's been really rough on these folks. And here we are, 2 weeks before Christmas. They've been out of work 6 months. You expect, maybe you go on strike, you expect it to be a week or two and, solidarity and off you go. 6 months it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But
I know what we should. We're going to move on, but if you've seen the video, the thing that really hit me the most, and I've actually gone back and watched it again because this struck me so much that I was afraid I was missing something. Is that at a certain point, Trevenna says something to the effect of, "I'll be taking your concerns back to the cabinet table. I'm here to listen," and so forth. And one of them said something like, surely your government can't still be in the intelligence collecting phase.
Yes.
It's been 6 months.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of thing you say when it's been a few days or a week. Well, we're figuring out the situation, and thank you for telling me it's been half a year.
Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah, that was a shocking part. But I'll tell you where their attention has been. It's not on these communities. It's been on Surrey, which they are desperate to hold on to because, the funny thing is, everyone bemoans, the BC Liberals, how will they ever defeat the NDP? BC Liberals defeated the NDP last time. All they have to do is hold their seats and add 1 or 2 more. The NDP actually have to gain 5 or 6 more in order to have a majority government. And to do that, they got to hold everything they have, which includes Surrey. And look, there's no doubt Surrey, fastest growing city in Canada, has been for a long time. Desperately in need of a second hospital. We all agree with that. Putting it in Cloverdale makes sense. It's near Langley, which is another fast growing community. You can serve both. That totally makes sense. But I got to say, Maclean, I'm so sick and tired of politicians. And look, the Liberals used to do this too. The announcements and re-announcements and re-announcements are ridiculous. And you have Adrian Dix and John Horgan and Ginny Sims and Gary Beggs and all these guys show up in Surrey to announce this brand new hospital. We're going forward. We're building this hospital. No, you're not. You don't have a penny for that hospital yet. You're building a business plan that'll be ready in 12 to 18 months. Give me a break. What have you been doing for the last 2+ years in government, Adrian Dix? Where is the business plan for the Surrey Hospital? You promised during the election campaign. 2.5 years later, you're just getting around now to doing a business plan? You don't have $1 in the budget, capital budget for this project? If I'm a Surrey voter, I'm like, here we go again. There'll be some shovel in the ground randomly just in time for the October 2021 election. Oh, yeah. But that doesn't mean construction will be underway in a meaningful sense.
No, and you're right. I mean, this re-announcing things. If you just went by the news releases, you'd think Surrey was getting 5 or 6 new hospitals. But you're right. And you mentioned the capital plan. There's no more money in the budget. I mean,
it's $1.5 billion project, a new hospital. It's not insignificant.
No, I mean, at a certain point, they're going to have to either, I guess they can do what they're doing, which is keep kicking the can down the road and acting like everything is fine. But they're either going to have to accept the fact that they need to go into a deficit, or they're going to have to say, the hospital will have to wait 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Yeah. Or whenever there's money.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I just find it ridiculous that we have these things over and over and over again. Maclean, the spec tax.
Yes.
What a money grab this is. Before you get on to the spec tax, I will just point out an interesting stat. Vaughn Palmer actually loves this stat. It's his favorite one, I think, from this whole thing. There's an empty houses tax. The spec tax was based on the empty houses tax in Vancouver. It was designed to make people, rent out their vacant properties for investors. You'll recall 1 or 2 stories at one point about mansions being rented out to cadres of college students. 81. That's how many homes have been returned to the rental pool after millions, after hundreds of thousands of dollars in bureaucracy spent and millions of dollars of taxes collected. It's almost like multi-zillionaires from China who own these properties don't really fret the idea of having to pay several $1,000s in taxes. It's almost like it's just a rounding error for them. So you tell me now, speculation tax. I know Carol James loves it and is ratcheting it up because it's just as big a cash grab for her as it is for Vancouver.
Well, I mean, it brought in, I think it was $155 million, and not coincidentally, the surplus is now $149 million. Ooh. So it doesn't sound like the speculation tax is going anywhere. But one of the things they did, even Andrew Weaver, and we'll talk about him later too, when the speculation tax came out, he described it as ham-fisted and rushed and all those things. And he was right. And one of the areas where there's sort of an obvious disconnect, and there are a few, was when you, and I'm in this situation myself, when you're in a strata as an owner, but you are prohibited from renting it out. So if you have to move away for work or something like that, then you either have to sell or you're going to pay a crippling tax. That is actually how I came to acquire my own condo. This is true. The people who owned it before got jobs in Ottawa, which they thought were temporary. And when they got a hardship exemption for a year to rent it out, but that was not denied, they needed another 6 months. So they had to sell in a hurry because they weren't allowed to rent. So this is not all that unusual. Most people who own in stratas aren't allowed to rent them out. And coincidentally, the exemption for people like me has been extended until, you guessed it, 2021.
What a world. It's just, the problem with this is that's a tax that she already had to rejig twice. Yes. That West Bank and other places, West Kelowna, pardon me, I'm old school, Okanagan apparently, that West Kelowna and Anmore and Belcarra have complained about because they feel like they're unfairly taxed. And you've got literally hundreds of empty condos sitting at Whistler that aren't taxed under this regime. That they had to carve out Doc Weaver's little island riding to make sure that none of his people got taxed in this. They've tinkered with this. They basically wrote the tax up on the back of a napkin, tinkered with it ever since, and it's becoming more and more apparent. It's a cash grab. It's nothing more, nothing less. Cash grab on the back of the envelope. Not great public policy.
Well, and there's been the longer it's gone on, we keep seeing little problems that it just doesn't appear they thought of. You mentioned Belcarra, which is there are literally log cabins that people had built by themselves, which have no running water.
No water, like nothing.
Some of them are only accessible by rowboat.
Yes.
The truth. Yeah. And so
why aren't you renting that, Maclean, for you and your lovely family?
Exactly. And then, of course, it doesn't help that, it was, I think, in Rob Shaw's article, and forgive me if I have the author wrong, where he mentioned the mayor of Belcarra said, we've tried to bring this up with our MLA, who's an NDP, but he hasn't been here since 2016. It's 2017. Yeah. And so we'd like to bring it up with him, but we keep trying. And this is their MLA.
Yeah.
So, it's just, it's clearly they don't have a good answer for these people other than we didn't think of situations like yours because we rushed it.
Yeah. No, and now they're going to ratchet it up, so that will make it worse. Maclean, you and I are hockey fans.
Yes, we are.
You cheer for one of those terrible Alberta teams that shall go nameless. I cheer for the wonderful, perpetually rebuilding Vancouver Canucks. But anyways, something that's happening in the hockey culture right now is a lot of focus, especially on coaches, as far as bullying, some racist behavior, poor human resources management things. And it got me thinking, we've seen coaches fired for everything from racist tirades against players to, in part making them make stupid lists of who works hard and who doesn't, and then outing that list in front of them. Dumb things. It does make me kind of sit back, though, go and wonder, we really haven't seen that kind of reckoning in politics. And there's one of two reasons why. One, maybe it's not, stuff like that isn't really happening in politics. Maybe it hasn't happened for a very, very long time. Or two, the old party discipline just keeps kicking in and protecting these people. Do you think we'll ever see that kind of politics, this kind of movement come to politics, this kind of scrutiny put on politics? I think back to Bill Bennett and, leaving caucus and Gordon Campbell screaming at him and Bill Bennett's famous, I think the tape is probably in the room you're in now, Bill Bennett's famous press conference, and he spittle all over his, he spat in my face, Gordon Campbell was a horrible bully, blah, 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 blah. That's as close as we've really come to this. And it was Bennett who would resign, and Campbell stayed on for another, I think another year or two, or I forget what the process was. Anyways, is this something we could see happening in politics? I guess maybe the speaker situation is another example.
Well, that's almost different. The answer to your first question is yes. This kind of stuff does happen in politics. It's not party specific, but anyone who works in this building can tell you stories that are not theirs to tell. And I can tell you right now, I know of some specific ones that I will not share because they're not my stories. I myself have not been bullied in this building. Okay. That said, I know of instances where others have, again, with all parties concerned. And by parties, I mean political parties.
Yeah.
you ask if it's going to happen, and I think a reckoning, and I think it will. And the way I think it'll happen is not dissimilar to what we just saw happen with now former Calgary Flames coach Bill Peters, where the person who called him out doesn't really have anything to lose anymore. Akeem Alou, who he had a cup of coffee in the NHL, and I don't mean to criticize him. I just mean he didn't feel like he had anything to lose by calling out a current NHL coach. Mm-hmm. I think if it happens, and when it happens in politics, it'll be something similar. It'll be a former staffer who has zero designs on coming back into politics, either because they just have no interest in it or because they're secure elsewhere, and they decide that, you know what, no, I am going to name names and tell my story. And I think when that happens, others will become encouraged, and I do think there'll be a reckoning. And I think that when it happens, it'll be messy, but it'll actually, in the long run, and I think it'll be a healthy thing.
Yeah. So if you're a political party out there with new candidates, this is a whole new thing you got to vet for. I mean, the NHL right now is working on code of conducts and things that they can do to sort of vet people coming into the coaching fraternity. I imagine I would hate to run a political party just for the idea of having to go through everyone's social media, and some people have burner accounts and other things, and try to track everything down that they've ever done, and have they expunged this, have they not, what was that weird comment, and now you add a whole new layer, almost of reference checks that you're going to have to do, and there's still going to be people squeak through, I think.
Oh, they'll absolutely squeak through, because a lot of these things they won't have had happen to them in their previous lives. I mean, if you are let's say a cabinet minister, chances are you haven't been a cabinet minister before. Yeah. And so you haven't had staff specifically assigned to you whose explicit job is to protect you. And you also probably have not been in a professional situation where there are people, paid, whose explicit job is to bring you down and to criticize you and to dig up dirt. I mean, this sort of breeds a little bit of paranoia, and maybe it breeds a little bit of there's a sort of a false camaraderie in your team. And so, I mean, you can't really scan or profile for that. You can make educated guesses, but in terms of who reacts well to becoming a cabinet minister or not, I mean, it's just guesswork until it happens. And I can tell you that's happened on the NDP side. I mean, there have been cabinet ministers whom everyone knows in the building is a nightmare to work with. Yeah. How did you know that beforehand? Not one of them had been a cabinet minister before.
Yeah, good point. I do think, where I think this may break first is in City Hall somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's a good call.
You get mayors, and I could tell you a personal story of my own. You get mayors who come in from the outside, who have no background in politics, who think they know everything, who don't understand the way the system works, who don't understand the term weak mayor system, because they're not weak. They've never been weak. But,
I'm the mayor.
The weak mayor, mayors only have one vote in Canada on a council of a bunch. So, the best mayors are the ones who find ways to work with people across, on issue by issue. But they come in and they can be very, very hard on staff. And there was a time in my life I was on Langley Township Council, and I went into City Hall every single day and kind of worked out of there simply because, there was a mayor who was very difficult with staff, and when I was in the office, he'd shut the door and leave them alone. So, that was my life for 2+ years. And not great, not fun. I never saw anything firsthand. I just know that that's why I was asked to come in. And, not good. So there are stories like that out there. I think that could happen. I suspect it'll be something like that. A mayor somewhere loses their stack and blows their stack, and someone gets tired of saying it, which is why, for one thing, very supportive of any kind of whistleblower policies you can put in any public agency. People should feel free to be able to speak the truth out. And
absolutely.
And not just because it might lead to the impeachment of a president. Okay. Speaking of politicians with crazy reputations, Maclean, are you becoming a Doug Ford fan on me?
No.
Okay.
Let's nip that in the bud right now. We're talking about our hot and cold politicians.
Yes.
And the one thing I did want to do was give a teensy little shout out that would be out of character for me, and that's Doug Ford. And here's two reasons why. First is I thought he handled the re-election of Justin Trudeau surprisingly well. He kind of made a conscious effort to build bridges, and he allowed himself to be seen as charmed by the Prime Minister. We had a really productive meeting, all that kind of thing. Look, he's the Premier of Ontario. Justin Trudeau's the Prime Minister. It serves them both to get along. Yeah. The other thing that really impressed me was this week. Was it this week? When former Premier Kathleen Wynne had her official portrait unveiled, which is a unique event in Canadian politics, where the current premier, who is usually the one who defeated the former premier, is the one to speak at the unveiling of the now former premier's portrait. And it's extremely bad form to do anything other than praise them. But I mean, I actually watched what Doug Ford said about Kathleen Wynne. The man was gracious.
Yeah.
He spoke really well of her. He said, what you've done as the first, female premier in Ontario, and the first openly gay premier in Canada, is that you have shown an entire generation of gay kids and kids who don't fit in, and just, girls, that yes, it is absolutely 100% within your grasp to assume the highest office in the province. And, and for that, I mean, that's an accomplishment over and above anything else that happened in office. I mean, Doug Ford said these words.
Yeah.
he deserves amazing credit for them.
Yeah, and you know what? To Wynn's credit, I mean, Wynne and Ford, it's fair to say they hate each other. I mean, they went at each other hard. Wynne said, Wynne was asked about it, and she said, look, he's the premier. This is something the premier does, and, we disagree on almost everything, or we disagree on everything, but he's the premier, and this is what premiers do. And, that was the nicest thing she could probably say.
Yeah, and the nicest thing that was believable.
Yes. Yeah, precisely.
So it's nice to see even just a moment, an oasis of civility.
Imagine grown-ups in office. What are we going to come to next?
Shocking.
I'm going to give a shout out to Aaron O'Toole, Conservative Party MP and critic, I believe, for international trade or foreign affairs, one or the other. But O'Toole managed to get a motion passed by the House of Commons against the Liberal government's wishes to have an investigation, a committee of all parties, look into the state of Canada-Chinese relationships. This, of course, comes on the one-year anniversary of the twin arrests of two businessmen in China, Canadian businessmen in China, which followed the Huawei arrest here. There's the tariffs that were slapped on canola. There's a number of Canadian-Chinese issues that are starting to break down. There's questions about Huawei wanting into the Canada 5G cell network. Lots going on there. The Liberals were adamant, no, we don't need to talk about it. No, we're fine. No problems here, nothing's here, everything's fine, just go about your business. But O'Toole managed to get the Conservatives, the NDP, the Bloc Québécois, and even the Greens together to vote to form this committee. And I think this is something that should scare the hell out of Justin Trudeau, because they could do the same thing, maybe on SNC-Lavalin, although I'm not sure if the Bloc would go along with it, but it's possible. They could do something on race relations, and drag them through the mud there. There's a lot of different things these parties can do, and it was a good early sign that not everything's going to go the Liberals' way in however long this government lasts.
And a sort of almost rare, uncanny, savvy political win for the Conservatives. When everyone was sort of, the news had all been, and we've been guilty of that too here, is talking about Andrew Scheer, will he stay, will he go, should he stay, should he go? This was a pretty interesting move, and as you say, they managed to get the NDP, Bloc, and Greens on side. That's an accomplishment.
Yeah, no, absolutely it is. Maclean, my cold politician actually comes from something you wrote, and it is Dr. Andrew Weaver making yet another appearance on the BC Poly Hot Stove. Doc Weaver, did I read your story right? Did he tell you that he's not only stepping down as Green leader, but once the Green leader is in place, he's quitting the Green Party altogether?
Yeah, yes. I had to go back and double check, but he made that really clear. And I want to be fair. He didn't say he was going to take his membership card and light it on fire. Nothing like that. Right. He said resigned, but the context was more like he would let his membership expire. That said, he made it clear, and he used these words. He was nonpartisan before he assumed this role, and he'll be nonpartisan when it's done. He is consciously kind of leaving the Green Party behind him. He said so.
Like, yeah. And so this is going to come back to haunt him when he stands up and tries to endorse someone. Well, and here's the other thing. You have another great piece of part of that story where he talks about how much he loves Horgan. Oh my God, Horgan's the best. We spend hours together. I love Horgan. Horgan. We're best buds now. I do wonder if, knowing now how close and tight he would end up being with John Horgan, would he have handled it differently in the negotiations, and would we have ended up with a coalition government and Andrew Weaver as an environment minister?
That is a really good question, and I wish I'd thought of asking him that at the time. It's probably one of those questions that only works in hindsight, because they have only become good friends since they reached agreement. They didn't care for each other at all.
Yeah.
And
I'll let you in on a secret. I'll let you in on a secret, Maclean. If you make me the premier of the province of British Columbia, I'll be your best bud forever too.
Absolutely. He did say, I mean, it was really interesting to hear him say, we've talked, again, something else we've talked about before is, the Greens are in a bit of a pickle in the next election, and that, the junior partner syndrome in any minority government usually has a hard time making a case for people to either, not vote for the government or vote for the party most likely to defeat them. And Weaver kind of said the same thing. He said, I don't know how I'd run against John Horgan. And not just because they've become close friends. It's because, he's supported him all this way.
Yep.
It's Weaver has a point.
Exactly.
Everything the NDP has done and not done will be a reflection on the party that put him there and kept him there.
Do you think 10 years from now anyone's going to give a damn what Andrew Weaver says about politics in BC?
Probably not, to be honest. I also think that is how he would prefer it. It was really interesting to hear him say...
Come on, Maclean. He does not. He wants everyone. The thing he's going to Jones for the most when he's out of politics is attention.
Yeah, but that's 10. You said 10 years. 10 years is a long time. And though, I mean, we'll see what happens to the Green Party in the interim. I think if Andrew Weaver has his way, he'll be. In fact, I'm not editorializing. He said this. I called him, and I still think he is this. The most influential and successful Green politician in Canada, which is, it's true, but he doesn't want to be seen that way, which, he wants to be seen as, he specifically mentioned Stéphane Dion and Gordon Campbell, two liberals. And he underscored the point a couple times that he was a federal liberal before he became a provincial Green, and that's kind of where his inclinations are. And so, I mean, I didn't mean to say he doesn't want the attention and doesn't love it. I think he does. But, in 10 years, I don't think he wants to be seen or treated as some kind of Green statesman.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
That does make sense. I would point out he stood next to Gordon Campbell at the Site C groundbreaking, supporting electric power, and
yes, he did.
In one of the most crass political displays of his life, flip-flopped against it when it became clear that not everyone up there was on board. So, an environmentalist against clean hydroelectric power is still a shocking thing to me.
Site C is one of those issues where I have challenged him on a number of occasions, and he just doesn't see it that way.
Yeah, well... Nonetheless. All right. But I should point out, that was your year-end interview with Doc Weaver. I know that we're taping this at a little bit different time than normal because you have one scheduled with Andrew Wilkinson. I'm really looking forward to the one you're going to do with John Horgan, because year-end interviews, I mean, that's like a staple of what a premier does.
It is, and it is customary for members of the Legislative Press Gallery, accredited members of the Legislative Press Gallery, which, I am.
Okay, I see
that in there.
Yep. Good.
That's real. That's the real McCoy here. I pay my dues. I applied just like everyone else. This is the second year in a row that I have asked for a year-end interview with Premier Horgan, and it's the second year in a row that I have been denied. This year, they also confirmed, the Premier's office staff, that I was the only member of the Legislative Press Gallery to request one who did not get one.
What's John Horgan afraid of, Maclean? What is he so terrified? What's his staff so worried about? Like, I'm on here once a week with you. You and I go back and forth. Sometimes I disagree with you, but we seem to be fine. You're not out to hatchet anyone. I've seen press conferences where you've asked questions and you're not like hitting him with a club or anything like that.
Never.
Or trying to catch him in a lie and stuff like that. You're asking reasonable questions. Cabinet ministers return your calls. I've seen quotes in the Orca from Adrian Dix and. What's John Horgan afraid of?
Yeah.
Hey, John Horgan, what are you afraid of? It's just Maclean. What are you scared of, buddy? Come on.
Well, you're right. He does take my questions. He does respond to them. He himself and his staff have characterized my questions, and indeed just me in general, as fair and respectful. And those are words that we have both used to describe the way I've treated him. And I mean, I've been around this building a long time. I have enormous respect for the office he's in and this institution. You'll never hear me refer to him as anything other than premier, because that's what he is, and he's earned it. He's earned that level of respect from those of us in the press gallery. So yeah, it's disappointing. They are not obligated, the premier, to grant everyone in the press gallery an interview. But you're quite right. I mean, if they are afraid that the interview with me will be rough, or we'll talk about issues he doesn't want to talk about, what happens in the other interviews? I mean, did you read Von Palmer's column this morning? That wasn't gentle, nor should it be. The whole thing is about transparency and accountability and accessibility. And I mean, I'm not going to make up questions based on things that aren't true, and I'm not going to make up his responses. If I asked him a question about forestry, Site C, LNG, what I think is a looming deficit, those kinds of things, I would have taken his answers and printed them. So to me, it just seems like a lost opportunity on their part. And they're right. There really wasn't anything to be afraid of.
No, look, what's the toughest questions he's going to get asked here? ICBC? Anyone's going to ask that. Private labor agreements, maybe. How are you going to stay in a balanced budget? Like, these are not, no offense to the press gallery, these are not rocket science questions, right?
Like you're absolutely right.
Question. And I'm assuming you're not asking for like an hour of his time.
No.
10 minutes, 15 minutes.
The standard window is about 20 minutes. I had that with Weaver, and I will have that again with Andrew Wilkinson. And 20 minutes is actually a long time for if you're just asking dedicated questions. And here's the other thing, John Horgan is pretty good.
Yeah.
You're 100% right. All of the questions that I would have asked him are things that he is well briefed on. And even if he did just want to sit there and give me talking points, he can do that for 20 minutes. He would have been quite safe. He has sparred with much more frightening people than me.
Yeah, like Mike DeYoung. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
No, look, you're much too fair and responsible and polite to say it, but I think it's cowardly of the Premier's office. I think they're playing silly games. I think that it's very clear that you are a well-accepted member of the press gallery. This isn't like Rebel Media or something like that where, there's any kind of stigma attached. The Orca, focuses on, issues of interest to BC historians, business people, that kind of market. There is no reason for John Horgan to be dodging your questions and dodging a year-end interview. And shame on the Premier's office, shame on the press secretary or whoever made the call. Jeff Meggs, if it was you, come on, Jeff, come on.
And here's this is the only. Thank you for saying that. And here's all I would say in response is, here's what we're going to do in the Orca in response to this. We're just going to carry on. Yeah. Nothing is going to change from our point of view. We're not going to. There's no revenge. We're not going to go now. We're going to get them. Nothing like that. We will continue to give voice to different voices here in BC. We will continue to ask fair and respectful questions. Nothing is going to change from my end.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of hopeful that they'll eventually see the error of, at least I think this was a mistake. And there's still one next year, we think.
Yeah. And look, I just think it would be, I think it's only fair of the Premier to answer the questions of interest to Orca readers. Questions that Deanie Moore's been bringing up in her excellent coverage of what's going on in 100 Mile House.
Absolutely.
Questions that Jody and George bring up in their pieces and in their talks, the cost of doing business in BC, the stuff that we do, that I've been writing about, PLAs and whatnot. Those are perfectly valid questions. And I know the Premier has answers for them. I don't agree with some of them. I think he's out to lunch on some of them. But just, stand in there, John, and take the questions and answer the questions.
Yeah.
I just don't like that sort of thing, and I think it makes them look small. The funny thing is they think it makes the Orca look small because, they're not going to do the interview. It makes them look small because they're not willing to stand in there and talk to a member of the Legislative Gallery.
Well, all I would say to that is next year, Premier, I will still be here, and I will continue to, and I will ask just as nicely next year. Yeah.
I remember Jim Goddard and I used to we would do a show every couple of weeks for his HowStreet.com network. And Gregor Robertson, he tried to get Gregor Robertson on his show for 27 months. Every Monday morning, he had a little note in his calendar. He would call the city hall and ask, and they'd give him the, we'll see what we can do. We'll see what we can do. 27 months, never came on.
Wow, that's remarkable.
Yeah, but that's
that's
not coincidentally, Gregory Robertson, who was one of his counselors. Jeffrey Meggs. So,
well, that's what makes this even weirder. Is it's not like he doesn't take. They were avoiding Goddard, but Horgan takes questions from me all the time.
Yeah,
that's what I don't get.
Yeah, and then he's got a whole okay. And let's say, all right, he is busy. Let's say he is busy.
He is.
Carol James is sitting there in Victoria right now. You got Rob Fleming over there. Like, there's no offer of anyone else, right? Like, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Oh well.
Anyways.
Next year.
And next week, can you believe it, Maclean? I will not be here next week. Santa Claus will be here.
Really?
I've heard from him. He emailed me today. He said, Jordan, take the week off. I've got my list of naughty and nice politicians. I'm going to come on, and he's going to talk with Maclean about it. It's hard to believe Santa Claus coming to the Orca. He's not afraid of the interviews, John Horgan. Not Santa Claus. He's going to stand in there and tell him.
I'm gonna give Santa a rough ride. Just you watch.
Whew. Oh boy. Well, not too rough ride. We want him every year.
That's true.
He's hard to get this time of year. So if you're out there in Orca land and you have an opinion on who the politicians were who were naughty and nice, do us a special favor. If you can send ones who are nice, they're always the harder ones to find. All right, do that for us. That will be next Wednesday. Who can believe it? And then Maclean, we're both off for a couple weeks.
Yeah, last week was the anti-penultimate. This is the penultimate, and then Santa Claus is, of course, the ultimate.
Well, absolutely. It doesn't get better than Santa.
And then it's, Vision 2020 coming in January.
Yep, there you go. All right, so BC Poly Hot Stove at the Orca BC on Twitter. He's at Maclean K on Twitter. I'm at Jordan Bateman. And well, for me, because this is the last time I'll see you, because Santa's here next week. Merry Christmas to all of you out there watching or listening. Thanks for putting up with my odd style of nonsense. I know you come from Maclean and grit your teeth and bear me out, but I appreciate it nonetheless. And I look forward to talking to you all again next year, because in BC, the politics is always hot. It's always hot in BC.
It's a good closer. We should keep that.
Yeah, we should keep that. We should workshop that for sure. All right, I'm trying to turn off the computer now, folks, but it is not working. Here we go. There we go. Talk to you all again soon. Bye-bye.